Hello and welcome back. And that is right, today we're talking about a brand new Samsung SSD for the consumer market. This is the Samsung 990. Now, this is joining an already well-established range of SSDs from this brand, but when I said that word consumer and SSDs together, I bet a number of, be they the keyboard warriors or the people that have just simply been watching the SSD market for the last year and a half, will turn around and say, what consumer SSD market? And that is completely justified. In fact, I'm not going to call this video a review. I simply can't. I am going to talk about some of the performance, I'm going to talk about the specs on board, such as they are, and ultimately whether you should go for this drive. But this video isn't really a review. It really should be a Samsung 990 SSD, why I love it, why I hate it. And we're going to be making a follow-up video precisely on this drive very, very soon, along with a written review and all of that. But mainly, I want to understand why this drive needs to exist. Now, to go through the specs provided by Samsung themselves, this drive has been provided by Samsung. They're not paying for this video, they're seeing it at the same time you are. But it arrives with a 1 TB and 2 TB configuration. It arrives pretty much the same as other Samsung SSDs. So at the moment, there's no heatsink included with this. This, I would argue, is an incredibly read-specific drive. It is write ready and it does take advantage of standard TLC RAM. That's from in-house alongside their own in-house controller that they've been utilizing alongside these drives in recent years. But the 990 here is their economical drive. Now, some of you hearing me say 990 and economical, the cool dudes in the crowd, will say, there's already an economical 990 drive, the Samsung 990 Evo. That's what the Evo series was, right? That was why Samsung went down this Pro Plus and Evo route that was really confusing everyone. However, this somehow falls between a lot of cracks. Now, it arrives, as I mentioned, with that controller and with the TLC NAND, 3D TLC NAND on board, the in-house. However, there's only one block. This is the 2TB model, and if we remove that label, we can see there on board, not very much. We have a huge amount of empty real estate there where we were hoping to see some DRAM, but this is a DRAMless drive relying on HMB, host memory buffer. So again, your OS is going to have to give off some of its RAM to get the drive working. But a 2TB NAND module there at the bottom, nothing on the rear apart from that little heatsink, heat shield there on the rear. But that's really it. Now, the recent releases from Samsung, with the exception of the Pro series, have all arrived DRAMless. So that wasn't a huge surprise to me. But this arrived at Gen 4x4 architecture with a promised 7.2 gigabytes per second read performance and 6.4 gigabytes per second write performance. It's launching today, so the official pages are hopefully up there. And during my own testing of this, I managed to hit 6.9 to 7 gigabytes really easily, natively in an M.2 slot, and 6.3 gigabytes via write via that native M.2 slot there. When I had it inside two different tested Thunderbolt 5 enclosures, I managed to get the performance up to 6.5 write over 6.5 gigabyte read over 6 gigabyte write. Now, a lot of that write issue is obviously coming down to the lack of DRAM there and the oversaturation, and again, depending on how much RAM you're prepared to give this device during its ops there. But again, returning to that issue there, or not so much an issue such as a misunderstanding, I think, on my part, of this whole Evo Plus Pro and none of the above drives like this, the Evo version of this drive arrived at Gen 4x4 architecture and Gen 5x2 architecture. This has limited itself down significantly. Now, other ways in which this drive has limited itself down significantly, particularly to get under that cost threshold, I'm pretty sure of it, is to do with the warranty. This drive arrives with 3 years warranty. Now, Samsung, the bulk of their drives have always arrived with 5 years of manufacturer's warranty and a drive write per day of around 3.4 to 3.8 drive writes per day. Now, this drive has its terabytes written rating brought down in accordance with that. So with that 5-year warranty, the 1TB and the 2TB arrive with 400 and 800 terabytes written respectively. Now, once you compare that against the 990 Evo, which has got a 5-year warranty and around a third higher in terabytes written, once you work it down into the drive writes per day, that's the figure I prefer to use rather than terabytes written, it actually works out largely the same. There's like 2 decimal places difference. So they maintain the same drive writes per day rating on this drive, but they have lowered that warranty. Now, the lower warranty to 3 years, the removal of the DRAM there, and the storage being delivered via that one package there and keeping it in 4x4 is one of the many ways in which presumably this brand has brought the price down. Now, at the time of recording, the price has been quoted to me that the 1TB here in the UK, the MSRP, so that includes the tax, is £212 and the 2TB model is £411. So the price hasn't come down that much, and again, factors in the tax. But MSRP on the drives, particularly with Samsung and some other brands out there, I would argue is generally way too high at launch. And not very long from now, you're going to be able to get this drive a little bit more affordably, and hopefully more affordably than the likes of the 990 Evo and the 990 Pro that are already currently available. And you can see that price change there when they quote the pricing online versus the MSRP round and about. But again, removing that label once again, the thing I keep coming back to, I'm just going to grab a drive over here. This is an SK Hynix drive. Now, this drive here, I got around about 2.5 years ago, and it's old spec, it's older drive, and it definitely is costing more right now than this drive. But the number of components that have now been removed during this evolution process to keep things affordable as AI is sucking air out the room is hugely notable. And I think this is a drive that is going to live or die by its price tag. The video we're working on at the moment right now is talking about affordability of SSDs and actual good affordable SSDs in the market right now. And depending on what this drive sits at post MSRP, and in what real pricing is going to be globally, may well, affect where it will position in that video. I understand a drive like this has to exist right now. It's the only way in which most punters are going to be able to get hold of a drive. But because of its architecture and its build, this is not a drive designed for heavy write-ops, for hefty caching there, for video editing, scratch disk. This is designed around read. So again, whether it is you're looking for something to bump up that Steam Machine pre-order you put, or something to put inside a home console, or just generally something you're going to use for heavy read rather than heavy write, this may be very suitable for you. And they are still a brand that has a good reputation in the world of SSDs, in their development and their in-house R&D. But it makes me sad that a drive like this has to exist when Gen 4 SSDs that we talked about here on the channel some 4 years ago, during the peak of Gen 4 SSDs between 2020 and 2022, man alive, the colours and flavours of Gen 4 SSDs in the market were just extraordinary. And alongside Gen 6 SSDs being borderline non-existent, I say borderline, and Gen 5 SSDs just not being worth the price of admission right now, Gen 4 SSDs and drives like this are something we're just going to have to keep getting used to, or at least stay with, for a good year or two yet. I need to stress that this is not a bad SSD. Again, this isn't a review video, but in my testing, it delivered. In my testing, let's look at the thermals. When I did sustained read activity on this, I only saw thermals of around 4 to 43, and it was during the heavy write operations that the temperature went Johnny Big Bananas, even with an external enclosure assisted with cooling fans and ventilation and a whole thing acting as a heatsink there. This is a drive prioritising read over write, and that's not a bad thing for those that need it. But We've spent so long with Gen 4 SSDs that provided great read and write that we're still getting whiplash in the marketplace right now when we want to populate a NAS, get a drive for our editing machine, or anything like that, where write activity that we took for granted for so long was available and accessible in Gen 4, that they worked out the kinks since 2020, that seeing a drive like this in summer 2026 is just going to depress some users. It is a good drive and delivers on what it says it's going to do. But with economies built in at scale, economies built in on component level, on the warranty and more, is just going to mean that for some users that have been holding out for SSD options to arrive in the market to solve the SSD crisis, this isn't going to be that drive. And those users, unfortunately, are going to have to spend the extra 20 to 30% AI tax in order to get a drive that can do that job. But for heavy read, this is a good drive. Let me know what you guys think. There should be a link in the description to the written review coming very, very soon, as well as links to get hold of this drive from a few different retailers. So if you are interested in getting hold of it and you want to support what we do at the channel, please use those links in the description to get hold of your drive. We get a small commission on every sale. It allows us to keep doing this. As I say, we have a follow-up video in the works coming very, very soon. And this drive, I'm pretty sure, is going to be in that video. But stay tuned. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.